places and what people are posting. Rona, don't worry, that was a great intro. Yes, just welcome everyone that could come along today. So the Lone Ranger Community Manager is something that we've been talking about for quite a while now. It kind of comes from a place where we feel that for a lot of community managers, they kind of operate in isolation, either within their company or as a hobbyist community, and especially in terms of connecting with other community managers that are trying to solve similar problems with them. And then along with that, the kind of well-being and health issues around isolation and just, how we avoid burnout. So really the topic of today is to sort of identify what the Lone Ranger Community Manager is, sort of talk about some practical aspects, some problems that arise, some challenges, and then some ways we can look at solving them, some tactics and some resources. And then we like these things to be fairly conversational. So as Nancy just said, please feel free to chat in the window. If we deviate from a few slides, that's fine with us. We want it to be very relevant. And just in the interest of full disclosure, while Todd and I are doing this for the KCN work, which is Nancy and Michael, as part of what my company does, which is Island 23, we also work with the NHS in the UK. So we're the community engagement expert around, as you can see on this slide, it's called Good Thinking. So it's predominantly around mental health. And the NHS are really interested in community managers, social managers, and how we can use the power of P2P to sort of solve these challenges. So that if you're wondering what good thinking is, that's what it is, and I can certainly talk a bit more about that later if you'd like me to. But just in terms of what we're going to be doing over the next 30 minutes, so Todd and I will just briefly introduce ourselves so you know why you should bother to stick with us the next 25 minutes. We'll have a quick icebreaker just to get a sense of where you guys come from and what you do. We're going to talk about the fact that you're not alone. This is a common issue. Hopefully there's a kind of hallelujah moment where people go, oh God, someone else gets it. We'll talk about the upskilling, talk about the Community Manager Essential Toolkit, and then just close with some resources and Q&A. So I hope that sounds good. Todd, if you can jump us. So, my name's Darren Gough. If you've come because you're looking for the cricketer or the Strictly Come final champion, which probably means more to people in the UK, I'm not that person, so I won't be offended if you want to leave straight away. But who I am is someone that worked for Martin Lewis's moneysavingexpert.com community. For about 10 years, I joined, I think I was employee 8. Enjoyment was a very small community of about a few hundred people. By the time I left, sort of 9.5 years later, we'd grown it to about 1.5 million, the largest independent financial website in the UK, the largest community alongside it. Subsequently, I've worked as a consultant, so taking a step across the other side of the fence, and I now help global brands and companies to identify community managers, train community managers, and build thriving communities. Todd?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Todd Nilson, and as Darren said, he and I are longtime colleagues, as is Nancy, and very grateful to be here this morning. I'm coming to you from Midwestern United States, and my personal company is Clock Tower Advisors here in the U.S., but I am a consultant with Island 23, working with Darren, and I've been working in the digital strategy space for a bit over 15 years. Consulting with dozens of organizations that want to set up online communities, whether externally or internally for organizations, and anything from startups to some pretty global kinds of companies. I really particularly enjoy working in the healthcare style communities or support communities, as well as not-for-profits. Although I again kind of worked across the board. Have had some time with some other large consultancies, including Feverby and Seven Summits, and because I kind of came at this originally as a technology recruiter, working in the IT space, I've had some good background within employer branding and some of the competitive intelligence work, as well as I've gotten very involved with gamification and game thinking. So I'm very glad to be here with everybody today, and looking forward to jumping in. Darren, you want to talk a little bit about good thinking here a little more, just to get us kicked off?
Yeah, I was just going to say, between us, we've got over 30 years experience in this field, right? And I was just thinking, it hasn't dated us today, I don't think. We still look as fresh and as flowingly locked as we did all those years ago. Anyway.
Even better. We look even better.
So the good thinking part of this, I won't dwell on this too much. I want this to be much more about the community manager experience. But just it's a program set up by the NHS to help people that are going through some of these issues. So you can see some of the topics here, whether you're sleep deprived or just whether you're anxious or low and you don't know where to go for support. And the NHS kind of think they've sort of cracked it in terms of using the digital space and communities and peer-to-peer support to sort of make some connections and sort of remove that real world reliability where you have to go to your GP every time or you have to leave your house. They're certainly not saying that's not important, but what they are saying is we should embrace the digital world and what we can do in terms of connecting people. There is a long-term plan document you can read with the NHS. It is very, very long. If you're bored on a Saturday night, feel free to skip through it. But just to contextualise what good thinking is and what it does. And as part of that, because my time is mainly spent with good thinking at the moment, they're sort of giving us some remit to help Nancy and Michael out with this. So I hope that explained it a little bit. There'll be some links at the end. If you want to go and read a bit more about good thinking, and obviously Todd and myself, then that's great. And we'll leave it there, I think, for us.
Great.
So let's break some ice.
Yeah, thanks guys for your introductions, and just to be sensitive to, we've got a couple of non-English speakers, so we just need to slow down a little bit, but thank you for the feedback. So what we want to do now is just get a feel for who is on the call. How long have you been supporting an online community? Maybe you don't support one, but you're just interested in the topic, or have been doing it for over 5 years. If you can vote now with the poll that should be on your screen, and apologies those on the phone, this is only available if you're dialing in. Then we want to ask, are you working alone or part of a community management team? Maybe you're in a big group, or you're the only person in your company focusing on community. And then the final question, how are you feeling today? Is everything peachy? Could it be better? Are you just so fed up and unhappy? So I'm just going to give you a few more seconds to get your votes, and then we will share the results. It's all confidential, it's all, no one knows who's voting for what, but it just gives us a sense. We've done it with a few other webinars on who's on the call today. So final few seconds, I'm going to end the poll there, and I'm going to share the results. So you can see that now. So the majority, 5 years plus been supporting communities. That's interesting, especially on this topic. Are you working alone or part of a management team? The majority is alone, but actually there's a few in some bigger groups. That's quite interesting too. And then how are you feeling? Could be better. So no one's at DEFCON or whatever the last option is, but that's great. So hopefully from what you're about to hear, it's going to help you be better. So thank you for doing that poll, and I will hand back over to the guys to carry on the presentation. Thank you.
I should point out that Todd had the last one on that poll option, the very last option, and we're not quite sure what he really meant by those symbols, and we're a bit afraid to ask. So
it kind of dates me to the Cold War, I think, but yeah, great.
So when we kind of talk about this topic, if you're not alone, in the work that we've done in this field, and excuse me if I have been talking a little fast, I think it's probably an English trait. I will try and slow down a little so you can follow for the non-English speakers. Some of these expressions that come out, and if we have a look through these, I don't know if these resonate with anyone particularly, but how do I deal with difficult problems in my community? This is a fairly common one. I don't know how to get senior stakeholders aligned around our community aims. I'll be very interested if the people that also work in the smaller teams, so the 3 to 6 people, whether they still find this is a problem. Personally, I feel stressed, anxious and burnt out. Some stuff around time management. I think when you're either an isolated community manager or you're in a small team, I think there's a need to want to do everything, and maybe sometimes it's how we prioritise our time so we can get the best results, and we'll talk about that a little later. And then, do other communities face these challenges? Are other people going through this? I have too many hats to wear, and I don't feel like I get the recognition. We ran a round table about a month ago, and this was in a room full of medical practitioners and community people. And this was the kind of the biggest one that came out, these last two, where I do so many jobs as part of my role, and I don't feel like I get the recognition for any of them. And then, I feel isolated and alone. I just don't feel like I'm getting the support in general. So, these are the common things that we hear. I suspect some of these resonate with some of you, and certainly if they do, please put your comments in the window, just to sort of help us understand exactly, whether these challenges are what you guys are all facing.
And that there are shades of gray around this too, where you may have a senior executive team that is supporting what you're doing, and they're supporting you verbally, but they're not supporting you in terms of their actions. And I see this a lot of times, sometimes with internal communities, where there was a large game company that I had been doing work with, and the concern was that they were creating an online community for a digital workplace for their employees to start interacting and collaborating with each other. But the concern was, are we going to be able to get the senior leadership onto the platform and actually be using it, rather than them just kind of saying verbally, yeah, go ahead, run with this community idea, having them actually come in and use it and be visible in the platform and be active participants as well. So again, it's the ways in which we find ourselves as lone rangers, as community managers, vary from organization to organization, but sometimes it's a little subtler in some places. Right. So, and I think this kind of transitions a bit. So a lot of communities end up getting started as a bit of a lean or agile startup, situation. It begins as kind of an ad hoc implementation, often an afterthought to a digital strategy. So there's already a content strategy. There's blogs. You've got maybe an email newsletter, and someone in the organization, usually a higher level executive, thinks, oh, you know what, it would be really great if we could have an online community to connect with our customers or our employees or some kind of other stakeholders. And so it comes in as a bit of an afterthought. And so a lot of times when these communities get started, they are not harmonized with some of the other digital efforts that are going on in the organization, and they're not necessarily harmonized with the goals and strategies of the overall organization, beyond just some sort of verbal kind of ways. However, where it starts to get exciting is those communities start to show value, and organizations will increase their funding. You get some more budget behind it. There's some ongoing money behind enhancing the community and growing it. Maybe your community team expands a little bit, but the danger is that it still looks a little more siloed. It's still cut off from some of the other parts of the organization. Where ideally we want to be, and where I know Darren and I try to get organizations to, is to help community managers learn how to better articulate the business value of what that community is bringing. How do they tell the stories? How do they show from the data how the business goals are being met and exceeded? And how are the insights that are coming out of community actionable? Are they resulting in innovations for your product or your service? Are they resulting in more engaged employees? Again, what are those returns on the investment that happen as a result?
So I'm just seeing a few comments in the window, which I think are just echoing some of the points we've been talking about already, which is great that we're resonating. So in our experience, there's a couple of personas that tend to happen. The first one is what we call the luckless office junior, or lodge. Now, this is probably the quickest route to complete failure when starting out on a community program. Generally speaking, this is a person that is actually doing a completely different job. They come from marketing or HR, or maybe even social media. And let's be clear, social and community are two very different skill sets. And they've got other things to do, but they've sort of been called into a meeting and someone's given them the task of starting community, and that's it. Wouldn't it be great to have a community? Everyone's doing community. We're not quite sure what we need to do, but you seem like someone that can get it done. Typically, they're quite a low-down employee. They're either an intern or someone maybe that's in their first or second job, and this poor person just kind of gets pulled into the job role. No community manager training, no experience, and then you end up with this formula. So it's the wrong person, the complete misunderstanding of what community management is, and then no training or experience, and that equals complete failure. And if we jump on a slide, Todd. So I think this is probably the most common form that we see. So this is the Lone Ranger community manager. So typically they've got some experience of community management, or at least been given a proper remit and a budget to drive the vision. Sometimes they've actually been recruited specifically for the role, or they've been moved from a different department, but actually given a proper remit to do this job. The company set the vision, but they still consider community the outlier or the satellite, which is what Todd was just touching on there. There's a lack of peer-to-peer support for this person. They're new to the role. They don't know where to go to get it. They don't know where to get training materials. And quite often with community management, the budget in the early stages and actually sometimes in the medium and large stages can be quite small. Go away, find a cheap course, find a couple of cheap books and you should be good. That sometimes is the message that gets passed down. And the problem with that is that whilst this person, struggles to succeed and in some cases, does a good job under very tricky circumstances, when we bring moderation into the mix as well, and we have serious moderations problems that happen in the community, this person is completely unprepared and they just lack the skill set to be able to cope. In our experience, it tends to be like a tsunami wave. So suddenly something's happening, moderation explodes and the whole wave crashes across the personal department. And it's really difficult to know what to do with that. The problems we have with that is the damage for the reputation of the community can be permanent. The real world damage to people's lives can be quite serious. And the investment or the decision to keep the community going is often pulled or certainly postponed indefinitely while investigation is carried out. So it's another route to failure, but it's something we see commonly across companies and brands. And it's something that I think has kind of been one of the pillars of what we're doing this presentation for. So hopefully that kind of has resonated a little bit with some of you as well. And then just to underpin all that, it's just constant pressure. So there's anxiety about your role, worry about the community, stress, and it's community management is only a sort of a 15 to 20-year-old profession in the current context. Community has been going back a long time. But I think it's a profession. Most people have become aware of it probably in this century. So we've kind of got this situation where even compared to the bastions of marketing or HR or legal, we're getting people burning out in community because we're just not dealing with them in the right way, giving them the right skills and giving the best possible chance of success.
And when you think about the skills required for this job, for both the luckless office junior as well as the Lone Ranger community manager, this is a role that, because it's so new and it's ill understood by a lot of organizations, they can't write a good job description for this opportunity. And so there's a lot of struggle with that. And in fact, if you even think about the way the job descriptions appear online for community managers, at least in the States, there's a lot of overlap between an online community manager and a community manager who manages apartment buildings or flats. And so there's just, it's very muddy. So even finding a good job description, if an organization that hasn't hired one before and they're trying to figure out what that looks like, a lot of times they'll end up with someone who's a social media manager or a marketing manager, and then they've got to go and train themselves to do it. And you think about all of the skills that are required for this role. This is a graphic from Diane Hinchcliffe. If you guys have ever read any of his stuff, he's fantastic. Had lucky enough to work with him for a little while. And he's kind of broken down all of the skill sets that are required for an online community manager. I mean, it's no wonder we're stressed, right? There's a lot of work involved with this job, and it touches upon a lot of different parts of the organization and a lot of expectations around this role. And I'm not going to read through this list; it's a bit of an eye chart, but again, the deck is going to be available to everybody, following the presentation here. So take a look at it, and by all means, take a look at the article that accompanies it, because it is some good thinking about that process. So should we take a look and see what kinds of chat summary we've got? Nancy, anything that is...
Yeah, no, there's definitely at the beginning some connection, like I haven't got enough time, I'm on my own, all of that sort of stuff. And then more recently, some great comments from Nick. He launched his community in 2014. It's had a few facelifts since then. Customer support and self-service. You've got people from Virgin Media, from the National Lottery, and let me just check. And then a recent a comment from Kevin saying that he's only been doing it a few months, and it's good to it needs a good deal of change from the business to sort of understand what he's trying to do. So, I'd like to hear more from where Kevin is. Does that give you a good summary of who's with us today, and continue on sharing?
Yeah, please do. And I think this has been from Darren's and my experience in working with a lot of community managers over the years. But it's good to hear from you that some of these things are resonating as well. So we acknowledge that a lot of times we feel isolated and trying to get internal buy-in and support financially, just for the technology of the program as well as operationally. How do you expand the team? And as you kind of grow your team, maybe you feel at least you're not like totally going it alone. But again, sort of how do you reach out across the organization? How do you contextualize your community in terms of the other things that you're doing? Well, we've got a couple of ideas for, that we've turned a community manager essential toolkit for reaching out and for breaking down some of those silos and for trying to buy a little bit more credibility and support for whatever it is you're trying to do in your community. And so we've got these 6 ideas. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's some things to start with that we think are likely places to start. So things like preparing your path around community issues, sort of understanding the purpose of what you're doing, prioritizing your time, getting some training, speaking the language of leadership, building support networks, so making connections, both internally and externally for your organization, and then self-care, because that's got to be an essential part of ensuring that you're connecting in meaningful sort of ways. So we're gonna break down each of these and get started here. So if we think about preparing your path, so community issues happen in a fast and furious sort of way, and so making sure that you've got a clearly defined purpose. For an overriding purpose for the community, that you are clear on that so that you can articulate it to others. Along the same lines, really having a defined sense of who your key audiences are and what they want, what they need. Anytime that Darren and I have worked with organizations and are trying to figure out how to help define a community in a better way, whether it's a brand new community or one that's maybe not been performing up to expectations. We're always looking to combine what it is that the organization wants and what they're trying to achieve with the audience that you're trying to engage within that community. The members of that community have their own goals and needs, and trying to match those things up. And where is that overlap? And to ensure that that's clearly articulated as the purpose for the community platform is really essential. And I think one of the dangers around the key audience side of that is you have organizations sometimes that will try to say, well, it's for everybody, right? But a community requires there to be people who belong in that community and people who are clearly not a part of that community. And so if you're trying to be everything for everybody, that might be a bit of a red flag for you. And then once you've really kind of answered some of those key questions, ensuring that you've got a growth map or a scalable way to expand that community over time. What are your plans for it? How do you reward those people who've been your very active, very loyal members over a period of time? Are there some things you can do in terms of giving them access to insider information, maybe tapping them as some kind of community advisory board or as advocates or ambassadors for your brand and what you're doing? And then starting to talk about some of those things internally to your team or your colleagues so that they understand that these are the goals and this is the purpose, these are the audiences that you're trying to go for the community. This happens a lot of times when defunding happens with executive teams. It's because they don't share the same goals or they don't share the same aims. It hasn't been articulated to them in a way that they're really getting. And then finally, having a plan for moderating these communities over time. So there's a lot of unexpected consequences that happen in unexpected places. So being prepared. Do you have policies? Do you have terms of service for the platform? A lot of organizations make sure that they're covered legally, but they haven't thought about expressing the culture or the etiquette of participating within that platform. So sometimes we'll talk about that as being sort of a community charter, but informally, it's how you help people understand how they can interact within the platform and what's acceptable kinds of discourse and what's not in that place. And then finally, again, preparing your path avoiding that tendency to want to go big and just do a big splashy launch for your platform or community. We usually find this doesn't work out very well. It sets an expectation that you're going to have 100,000 people in your community within the first 3 months, and it just never works out that way. You might have people join, but as far as getting ongoing engagement, and I think I saw someone in the chat was mentioning about that, struggling to get engagement, that's difficult. So you need to have a plan around how you're going to get people talking to each other. You're going to connect with each other, and there's no shortcut to the hard work of reaching out to people in the community and inviting them in, helping them understand how they can interact with each other, connecting them with other people with like interests. Darren, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty exhaustive, actually. Just apologies to anyone who saw the corporate dog walk in then. I think he's just interested in what we're talking about. So that was, if you saw a tail in the background, that's who it was.
Got it. And there's some really good discussions points here I'm going to want to come back to, but just to kind of to continue to move through here, a second big consideration is learning how to prioritize your time. So being as effective as possible with the time that you have available. The essence of any kind of strategy is to acknowledge that you have limited assets and you're going to have to make some tough decisions. And the assets that you have are time and personnel and technology, and you have limited amounts of each of these. And usually time is the one you think you've got the most of, but you don't. And so it makes sense to really be hard on yourself about prioritizing what's most valuable for your community and prioritizing that. Is it as critically important for you to be greeting every new member of the community, or is it better for you to have a good email onboarding program for people that have joined the community anew and are trying to, and it's a way that you can engage more people at scale, pointing them to great discussions or great resources or helping to explain things rather than kind of doing it again and again yourself. Again, you need to take a look at the data and see what is the best decision for spending your time. The other piece of this is because, again, referring back to the Dine-Hinchcliffe diagram of all the different duties of a community manager, it's hard to sometimes pull away from, being in the center of that storm of activity and always kind of reacting to whatever everybody is saying. I had the same thing when I was working in recruiting. You get a phone call, you react to it. You get a new job requisition, you react to it. Online communities work in the same way. Someone's responded to something. It's a bit of a problem in the way that they responded. You've got to respond to it with moderation. You've got an executive that wants this report. And so you find yourself sort of reacting, and you can get a bit of whiplash in the process of trying to be reactive to that. So it's good to set aside some blocks of time for yourself so that you can accomplish deep work, at least a 90-minute block every day. So you can set aside time for yourself for a task. You know what? I need to figure out what kind of discussion questions I'm going to ask in the community this week, or what kind of topics I can help people to collaborate on. I'm going to turn off the notifications. I'm going to sit down the smartphone. I'm going to close the door to my office, and I need to work for 90 minutes. I need to spend some time so that I can do that effectively. And then there are also times when you're just kind of stressed out. You need to write a response email to somebody, or you need to respond to them within the community for something they've asked for. And you're worried about having a too emotional sort of reaction to that. That is the best time to take a break. Get up, walk away, take a 5-minute, walk and just kind of take care of yourself. Go get yourself a coffee or a tea, whatever you prefer. That is priority time, and you need to spend that time for yourself. And then finally, it's about prioritizing that effort to build relationships in your organization, sitting in on meetings, talking to other people who are stakeholders for what you're doing, and ensuring that they understand what you're trying to do with the community to support the efforts of the business. So again, just kind of thinking about this a little bit, and even if you're in the situation of being a luckless office junior, as we've termed in this, or even as a Lone Ranger, you may have other responsibilities than the online community itself. And so it's a matter of thinking about, if you've got only 30 minutes a day or an hour a day or 4 hours a day, what's the best use of your time, when you know that you're tasked with growing that community. Well, if you've only got 30 minutes a day, maybe your top priority is starting discussions and posting questions to foster that engagement, or responding to discussions, or inviting at least one person a day to come into the community and experience it, and just spend some one-on-one time with them. It can feel like we've got we've got this goal of getting 5,000 people in the community by X date. But that only happens once you get a core of active people, not just joining the community, but coming in, understanding what it's about, and actively engaging with it.
Yeah, and I think Rona was saying just at the top there, she says, I probably struggle most is delivering learning coaching outcomes and engagement strategies. And I think this bit is kind of resonates, which just dropped off my screen, 2 seconds. With I do delivery operation, and with my IT dev background, I'm seen as something as a fixer. And I think that's true as well. I think the more you are seen as someone that can get something done, especially in a reactive capacity, the more work comes your way because you're just seen as that person that will do it. So I think that's a really important point as well. There's a few discussions going on about engagement in the window, but I think we'll just carry on with our slides for now and maybe just come back to that, but keep the discussion going by all means. So when it comes to training, I think a lot of companies, this goes wider than community management, but there's sometimes a sort of a default to think about training as like an indulgence. We sort of, sometimes budgetary training is given as a sort of last afterthought, and we kind of give some allocation out of the budget, and like I said earlier, get some books or find a cheap course. But actually, I think training is one of the most important things you can actually do with your time and your money and your resource, because you're learning from people that have been there and done it. Now, whether that's in the form of some sort of online course, or it's some sort of personal coaching, people like, and obviously this is a lot wider than just Todd and I, but there are people that have been in community a long time, like we all have. And we've found the gaps, we've learned the lessons. And when it comes to cost and justifying cost of that, it's good trainers and good materials can help you avoid those missteps that waste time and money and cause angst with internal stakeholders. So time and training, it helps you be far more effective with the limited budget you've got. And I think these are sort of 5 key points here in terms of how you sort of look at training. So, audit where you are. A lot of people go headlong into, let's fix it or let's make it better without really understanding exactly where they are right now. And, your view as a community manager that's doing the job every day, that might be very different from the rest of your senior stakeholders who only hear certain things, or maybe jump in once in a while. So it's really important that everyone is on the same page about what's needed to make this better or to improve. And that helps you identify where the skills shortages and challenges are. A lot of the time this will be for the community manager or your wider team. But, also it's identifying skill shortages that other people in the wider company might have that overlap with community management, that again can make your job much more effective and help them to understand what a community can do and what the value of it is. Speak with those community building experts. When you think about the Lone Ranger as a figure, by its very nature, we're basically saying that you're sort of isolated. And yet there's a huge amount of people that are also in the same position. And there are a huge amount of people that have got time to give and want to help. And it's how we connect those people. And, my main goal, I think, along with Todd today, is just, if one thing you do after this webinar is just seek out, join Nancy and Michael's group for a start, but seek out some groups and start to connect with other people that are sort of living and breathing this stuff every day. And I think that is the first step to removing the isolation of the role. And then Todd talked about this earlier, but, create that program for yourself that does fill in those gaps. So because we've done the audit, because we've identified where the shortages and challenges are, it makes it much easier for us to build that program. You're filling in the gaps, but you're also doing them in an effective way that means that when you're coming to train, when you're coming to work with coaching, you know exactly what you need to get out of that. And then when you are working with a coach, you know what questions to ask. Any good coach eventually will help you work out what those gaps are. But, why not come to that first meeting with the coach with a pretty clear idea of what you think is going on? I don't think it's going to be perfect. That conversation's not going to be 100% right. But I think knowing where your gaps are is going to be a lot more beneficial in terms of maximising the time and budget you have with that person. And then if there is a lack of knowledge across your team or organisation, you might consider engaging with community experts in some sort of company-wide workshop. Now, these always sound like quite large things. And yes, for some bigger brands, they certainly can be. But, workshops can be 2 people, 5 people, 10 people. But the most important thing is you're giving that information to people wider than the community team. And here's the important bit. It's allowing those people in the room to ask questions. I've worked for a German energy company, and I've stood in a room full of, as is Nancy, in a room full of 30 extremely senior, powerful people who asked some very tricky questions and made us sweat a little bit. But that was the point of the workshop, was to bring those questions out into the open. Make sure we were able to answer the difficulties. And also, people that don't work in community don't know what those gaps are. So for their point of view, being able to speak the language again and find out what is going on is hugely valuable. So, sort of consider that workshop aspect as well in terms of unifying your team and bringing them together. Todd, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a really good summary, Darren, and I think it leads into the next point, which is really around speaking the language of those executive stakeholders and sort of understanding what's there. So we'll kind of move on to that unless you had something else to add. But the idea of sort of learning what motivates your internal teams and senior leadership, and someone in the chat window just kind of made mention to this, of especially for internal communities, if you're trying to enable a digital workplace and employees really being aligned with the business goals of the organization. It's not optional. You can't create a community strategy whole cloth, just on your own and articulate it for your team. It's got to be done in conjunction with a leadership team, and to make sure that that there are business goals. I just completed for a manufacturing company an internal digital workplace strategy. And and for them, like, fortunately, they had there were 2 elements that I had to tie it to. One was they had a core 5 business goals, not community goals, but business goals for the organization, what they were trying to do. And so I spent time relating those 5 business goals to what the community is doing and what it was going to perform as an internal tool set for employees and stakeholders for the organization. And then the other thing that it had was a quite extensive list of cultural values for the organization. It's like there were over 20 values that they had outlined for it. And so as part of that digital strategy, I also worked through each one of those elements and related it to how the digital workplace, the internal online community, was going to be served, or was going to serve those cultural elements as well. So you need to be thinking about the things that they've stated as business goals, as well as what's motivating them for success. Excuse me. Both the intrinsic and intrinsic motivators, like extrinsically, are there rewards tied to overall productivity of the organization and culture? If you have an executive champion who's in HR and their biggest goal is retention of employees by increasing engagement with the organizational brand, then that their extrinsic motivator, their desire to retain employees in the organization, that's going to be one of the overriding things that they're going to want to see from the online community, that it is serving that purpose of keeping people engaged. And then intrinsically, many of them just may be interested in helping employees sort of express what they want to do. And again, I'm taking an internal community example, but it can be applied externally as well. You need to find ways to communicate the wins of that community. And I think a lot of us tend to want to show the metrics of what that success looks like. We've had this many people sign up for the community. We've had this many people come back on a monthly basis, logged in, and they've contributed in some way, or they've done something significant. But it's also about those, not just the quantitative data, but also some of the qualitative storytelling that can really make the value of that community come alive. And I find this particularly for a lot of executives who are impatient looking at the data. They'll look at it and they'll say, yeah, okay. But if you can tell them a story that explains how a customer has gotten engaged with the brand and how they were helped specifically by the community, they can get kind of excited about that. They can get very interested in how they can do more of that, how that can be repeated further. And And so, kind of maintaining those relationships, speaking the language, it's not just about, having a scheduled one-on-one meeting, but it's about interacting socially with those other people in your organization, so that you've got a good lock on what they are interested in or what their motivators are and how you can relate the success of the community to their successes. And if you can do that, and that might be, getting together for a learning lunch or, meeting a group of, maybe you're sitting down with your marketing department or your HR department, or maybe you're sitting with an executive team. Maybe there's a lunch and learn that you can hold with them to understand what they do and to explain what you're doing, because a lot of times they may not even be aware of the work. And so part and parcel of this is, having an effective way to communicate the successes of the organization. So as I mentioned, don't wait for the 2 minutes at the end of your team's stand up. You need to take initiative and create some kind of weekly report out to all the people that have an interest in what the community is doing. And so, oftentimes just it's a matter of, insufficient awareness of what's going out. Darren, you've talked about maybe doing sort of a Friday roundup message out to everybody.
We did this quite successfully at Money Saving Expert. Friday afternoon is quite good because people are either trying to get work done or they're sort of starting to shut down. But rather than just sort of send people just data, which I think is where a lot of organizations go wrong, you're trying to give them stuff, as Todd said, like stories, things that kind of resonate with it. But the important thing is not just sending this actual roundup, but it's what you do around it. So you send it, you make sure you ask for feedback. But, make sure you go over and talk to people about it. When you see people in the coffee room, whatever, bring up some of the topics, and get them to actually, respond, to talk about it, to make an emotional connection. And I think that sometimes it doesn't help if you're just sending electronic missives and not sort of following up with that one-to-one interaction. So the face-to-face time is a really big and important part of what we do here as well. And then, people do respond to emotion. Communities, they don't just have to be, even if they're product communities or, quite scientific communities, people still respond to emotional connections. So it's making sure we're taking those parts of our community that are going to elicit a reaction. That can be a negative reaction. It can be something that people are passionate about and they think the community has got it wrong. It's kind of driving conversational topic starters and reasons for people to engage, rather than, as Todd said, well, look, here's a list of some data from this week, and most people sort of go, yeah, great, and move on to their jobs again. So it's really important that these two things kind of work hand in hand. I'm just really interested in the amount of conversation we've got on the window. It's absolutely fantastic, guys. Thanks for doing that. And just to Todd's point in the last slide about learning lunches, and this is a pro tip for you, but people will do most things for free food. So anytime you want to get people in a room and you think they might not be that bought into it, just offer free food, and most people will at least give you the first 5 or 10 minutes to win them over.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. And I think I got thinking about this too. And maybe it's not just a Friday email that goes out. Again, it's that face-to-face component. And if you're dealing with a team that is maybe remote and far-flung, maybe think about doing it as a Skype meeting, or maybe send out a video of yourself, sort of recording, hey, here's the latest what went on in the community this week. It's much better to have the video interaction. As we're seeing right now in the social media space, it's entirely about video in 2019. And if you can record an interesting video about yourself and be able to talk about the successes of the community just off the top of your head, as opposed to reading off of a script or sending through a text email, I think more people are going to be likely to click on your video and watch that video and get an update that way. So I think that can kind of keep that element of fun and interest involved with it at the same time.
Totally. So I'm just aware that we're coming up to the last 10 minutes of the hour. Thanks everyone for being patient. I think if we just move a little quicker through these last slides, obviously we'll make the slides and the video available afterwards. So we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if you just jump on a slide, Todd.
Yep.
So I mean, we've covered some of this already, but build those support networks. It might feel like it, but you really aren't alone. This is a big profession around the world, and there are a lot of people that can help. You've got both internal stakeholders and people who are part of your online community. Again, it might not seem like they're on your side sometimes, but most people, once they have things explained and they connect in a way that is meaningful to them, They can help, they can support, and they can be allies within your organisation, not to mention your extended social media following. And as Todd said earlier, just 30 minutes a day to building relationships. It's that kind of incremental improvement piece where, sometimes it feels like you can never get started on it, but it's only one conversation. It's only, a couple of how did you find, or did you see this, or conversation starters that kind of gets the ball moving. And by the way, it does include participating in internal meetings and work groups other than your own. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was go and sit in other people's meetings. Seems crazy. You'll definitely get kicked out of some meetings, and some people will just be deeply suspicious about what you're doing. But if you just make it clear you're there to learn, you're not going to have an opinion on what the latest, greatest onboarding technique is, or what marketing strategy is. You are just there to learn. It's helping you understand what other teams' motivations are. So you're not coming at it just from a community inside-out point of view. You're actually thinking about where their stress points are, where their challenges, how do we create content for marketing, how do we solve problems for legal. Every department within a company will have these challenges, and community can help solve a lot of these things. So be thinking about that. And tell your story to peers online. We're kind of doing this now. I mean, the chat window has been fantastic, but don't be afraid to sort of tell your unique circumstance to other people. You'll be amazed at how much it resonates with other people. They might have a different version of that story, but there'll be similar challenges. And don't feel like you'll go. You might be the one to go first, but you're certainly not alone in this. So be confident. Feel like you can speak to people, and you will receive fantastic support. And then the final one, just from our slides here, is just self-care, really. I mean, the last webinar we did, if you want to go and look that up, was much more around self-care. But, the community manager is isolated and does suffer burnout. Think about how you can combat that. Simple things like using support in other time zones. There are companies that can provide, fairly cost-effectively support. Some of your super users, might come from other countries or time zones, and they can help. Make it clear on the community what the core hours of the staff is or are, so that people know when they're going to get a quicker response, or when it might be handled through a different system. Utilise those super users, ambassadors. AI is always a bit of a divisive one. I think AI is definitely moving in the right direction. I don't think it's at the level that some people think it is at the moment. I think the human interaction of community managers and the understanding of nuance and empathy are still really important, but certainly it can pluck some of the low-hanging fruit down for you. And this is one that so many people don't do. Actually have a policy or operational guidelines that deal with these issues. So when you're working to a policy or a set of guidelines, there's a paper trail there. So when someone that isn't anything to do with the community and is perhaps quite a senior member of staff comes and asks you why X, Y, Z has happened, be able to show that we worked to an agreed policy and actually we took the necessary steps to do this. You'll be amazed how many times that's not the case. And then be proactive in defining future working conditions and the evolution of the role. Putting the basics of good self-care in place, and help speak to peer-to-peer experts who can really help. And also in terms of succession management, make sure that if someone else comes into the team, or if you leave the team, it can be picked up and people can actually pick up from where you left off, and they understand what the role entails and what needs to happen. Nancy, you want to push us along?
Yeah. I was...
Okay, so just very quickly, a quick slide on self-care here. We'll leave you guys to go back over that, but we'll have to answer questions in the group. But the three that tend to come out quite big in this is the sort of... Is there a poll here, Nancy?
We're going to do it after the self-care one, just to see where they're what they're thinking.
Here's 10 things that a colleague of mine, Dr. Richard Graham, has taken from the Mental Health Institute's materials in the UK. So just 10 things to think about in terms of being a bit more proactive when it comes to self-care. And the graph on the left is the sort of mental health sphere, if you like, that's set out by keys that might be interesting to you. If we have more time, I'd love to drill down a bit into that. But our other webinar previously goes into a bit more detail. So if you're interested, we'll provide the links and maybe go and revisit on that side.
Yeah, I'll send a link in the notes of this one, I think. So I think this is where I launched the poll to see from what you've heard. I mean, the guys have given us so many rich insights there of things that we could try. And I can tell by your comments on the chat that it's resonating with you, which is fantastic. So now we just want a quick check of what do you want to try first out of the options you've been given this afternoon. So really quick. I'm sorry, Wanya, if you can't see the poll again. I understand it might be something to do with accessing it through the app or the browser, but right. get all your votes in. I'm about to close the poll. Not so relevant for our international colleagues. What they're going to focus on now is build the internal and external resource networks. Fantastic. And we will help you with that. Back over to you guys. Thank you.
I'm really pleased to see self-care there as well. It's so important, guys, to sort of take time out to look at that. So please do go back and review the previous webinar.
So I think just a couple of takeaways here, some things to remember that, the community management, whether it's a hobby or a career, is a job that has boundaries, and you need to enforce those. It's so easy to always be saying yes, but it's not always wise to do that for your own personal mental health or even for the business itself. And so thinking about having a start and an end and striking a balance with the rest of your life is really important. In work-life balance, the idea is not so much that, when you're done working and you don't go back to it until the next day and it's an 8-hour day. I don't think any of our lives work that way. It's more of learning how to blend effectively, but to have sort of those boundaries between things. And then, thinking about, how we work together to manage our communities is going to be the key to removing that Lone Ranger stigma or syndrome in any of our online spaces. Darren, anything else here?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. I think it's at the end of the last slide, Todd. Just jump past one. So just a quick roundup of the tactics we talked about. I won't go through those. It's kind of a collation of the stuff we've spoken about, so I'm aware we're running out of time. Just skip on, Todd. So here's a few resources that might be interesting to have a look at. Dale Carnegie is a sort of an 80-year-old book that's still relevant. I'll leave these for you guys to explore. Have to answer questions in the group. Jump on, Todd. Here's some self-care resources that might be of interest. Especially the people that ranked that in the poll. I'll let you to have a look at that. Jump on, Todd. And here are the couple of the previous ones we did, including the mental health in online communities. There's also a link to Nancy's group there. I think that's probably the last slide. So I'm so sorry we're sort of running out of time, but we will hang around as long as you guys need us. So Nancy, if I just throw back to you, what are the kind of key questions and themes coming out?
Hi, I just asked if there was one killer question and I haven't got a response to that, but there's definitely been a flavour of building engagement, building both not just internally with stakeholders, but also externally. So we're going to point them to some resources from previously. But yeah, I think everyone's feeling like these are some good things that they can go away and try. So thank you for that. Right, there is a couple more questions coming through. So while they're coming through, we will send you the recording of the webinar. We will send you the slides of the webinar and a link to the group. It might take a couple of hours, but you will get that hopefully today. We've got the group that you can contact either of the speakers at any time directly. You should all have their email address from the confirmation, but also through the group. So the killer question, Jennifer is asking, how do you guys present ROI to stakeholder as a community manager?
Is that question, how do you physically present it, or how do you choose what ROI?
I think it's like, what do you measure to prove the return on investment, Jennifer? I think I'm interpreting it for you.
I'll assume that. Actually, one of the biggest questions here is what's actually important to your community and to your company. I think the danger, let's start there. I think the danger is getting caught up in headline metrics. I think every metric is important, and I think it's how we blend them together. So whilst having 1 million members in a month because you spent 5 million on marketing sounds fantastic, is that actually more beneficial than having 50 people, of which all of whom are highly engaged? So I think it's understanding what the ROI is valuable to the company and how you blend those things together. I think when it comes to engagement, how often people are posting, but also on the point that Todd makes about anecdotal and qualitative evidence, what people are actually saying. Again, we can put a panel up of figures, and if that's what your stakeholders want to see, well, okay. But I think actually it's telling the stories within those metrics and actually putting things in to make them kind of relevant to people. Todd, do you want to expand on that a little as well?
Yeah, I think just tactically the way that you go about telling that story, when you're going to be sitting in front of an executive audience, they tend to get very impatient very quickly, and so engaging them quickly with a story that captures the emotion of what they're looking for and what they need is super important, to do. Think of it almost like if you had to get up and give a TED talk, or if you had to do an entrepreneurial pitch for money. It's the same thing. What are you going to do that's going to grab them by the lapels and shake them, so that they understand, oh, this is what I've been talking to you about. Like one of the organizations I was working with earlier was talking about, the executive team did care about productivity, but what they really were hot about was company culture. And so relating the platform to company culture was the ROI for them. And so it's not always about sort of like what's listed in the written company strategy. It's about understanding what's in the head of that executive team that you're going after. So really understanding that audience and sort of what makes them tick and react.
And also, just to round this off, I'm so glad you said lapels, grab them by the lapels. I did wonder where that was going, Todd. So look, we're bang on 3:00. I think it's probably a good place to wrap, Nancy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love the questions that have come up today, and I just encourage you to keep the conversations and the connections going. This is exactly why I'm motivated to do this. We want to help each and every one of you. So, don't leave it to just this hour. Keep asking questions, connecting and supporting each other, because we don't want to be lone rangers. This is not, we've had some great tips today, so it's up to us to put that into action. Anything left from you guys to conclude?
No, just be proactive. I mean, when you see these webinars, if you've got some time today while it's fresh in your mind, just go and do one thing, just make a start on one of those areas and just start the conversations in the group and let us know how you get on. And, the more we can help you, the more we'd like to. And just thanks everyone for your time. I know everyone's got to take an hour out of their day. Apologies for any fast talking. That's probably me. But hopefully it comes to action.
Yeah, no, thank you. Oh, if you have any ideas, feedback, comments, always let us know. I think, and we look forward to seeing you or hearing from you next time.
Todd, can you just put up the connection slide? Just the last.
Oh yeah, there's one more, isn't there?
Just quickly, if you want to connect with us through any channel and just look at the Good Thinking program, that's it. Nancy's links to the KCM will be included, but it's on the previous 2 slides up anyway. So please do come and say hello.
Yeah, and just keep connecting and not be a lone ranger. Cool. Thank you both. Thank you so much for preparing and delivering that. And thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.